Lane Kiffin's wife visits Baton Rouge. We've got everything you need to know as Kiffin Watch heats up. It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe as always. One of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So download the app today. Well, what a day it was on Monday in Baton Rouge. Layla Kiffin, Lane Kiffin's ex-wife, was in Baton Rouge with several family members, and I'll tell you everything I need to know. Subsequently, Ole Miss reportedly giving Lane Kiffin an ultimatum when he has to make a decision, and what really could be the deciding factor that could sway Lane Kiffin to Baton Rouge and away from Gainesville. I want to point this out first before I go any further, okay? As we record this episode here, it is Monday evening, November the 17th, as we record. Sunday, here on this show, if you recall, there was a pretty heavy feeling out of Gainesville that Lane Kiffin to Florida was a done deal. There were a lot of reports. Now, I want to remind you, and I am going to pat myself on the back here. This is what I said sitting in this chair on Sunday, when all the reports that Lane Kiffin to Florida was a done deal. I said this in this chair on Sunday. Lane Kiffin to Florida is far from a done deal. And Lane Kiffin to LSU is very, very, very much in play. You could tell it was the same chair. That's not AI generated. If you're listening, you can't see it. But if you're watching on YouTube, you can see same setup and everything. What I knew then was that Layla Kiffin was visiting Baton Rouge on Monday. And there is no way Layla Kiffin flies to Baton Rouge just to check out Perkins Row. She's not going to shop in Town Center to check out the boutiques. She was coming to see Baton Rouge to see if this is where she would want her family to live, very obviously. So the weekend went like this. Layla Kiffin, reportedly also with her son Knox, who is a sophomore at Oxford High in Mississippi, were visiting Gainesville on Sunday. They went back to Oxford. Knox has school, and his high school team is in the playoffs. They have a game this Friday, so he obviously can't miss school. So Knox was in school. Layla Kiffin, along with 3 other people said to be Kiffin family members that I have confirmed were not Kiffin's children. More on that in just a second, so I have a thought here. Departed Oxford for Baton Rouge. So the MMR plane, MMR is a company, Baton Rouge. Pepper Rutland, who's the CEO of MMR, played linebacker at LSU years ago. The plane, you look at all the flight trackers, and WBRZ reported this too, by the way. A plane left Baton Rouge at 9:43 Monday morning, landed in Oxford at 10:29 a.m., and then it returned to Baton Rouge, landing at 11:48 a.m. So just before noon Central Time, the plane carrying Layla Kiffin and 3 other family members landed in Baton Rouge. And then they were in Baton Rouge from noon until about 6. At 6:07 p.m., that plane departed back for Oxford. So Layla Kiffin spent about 6 hours in Baton Rouge on Monday, seeing the town, seeing Baton Rouge. Keep in mind, even though Lane Kiffin has coached in Baton Rouge plenty, when you're coming as a visiting team, you fly into the airport, you see the refineries north of the airport, You drive to the Marriott on Corporate Boulevard, and then you go to the campus. You don't see very much other than the airport and College Drive, right? And then Tiger Stadium with a lot of rude fans rocking your bus and whatnot. So it was an opportunity to see Baton Rouge, to see if this is a place where she would want to be. Now, I mentioned the family. So the report was that it was Layla Kiffin and members of the Kiffin family that were traveling. Well, Landry Kiffin, the couple's oldest daughter, is a student at Ole Miss, so she was in school. The couple's middle child, Presley, is a volleyball player at Southern Cal. She lives in Los Angeles. And then, as we just mentioned, Knox, the youngest, their son, is in high school and is preparing for a football game. So if it's Kiffin family members, you could use deductive reasoning here to realize that Lane Kiffin isn't the only Kiffin that works on the Ole Miss staff. His brother, Chris Kiffin, also works on the Ole Miss staff as an analyst. Well, Chris Kiffin's wife, Angela, it would stand to reason deductively here, was probably accompanying Layla Kiffin to Baton Rouge. You could sort of piece together how these things may go and how they may travel together. So we're getting some word about what happened during the day, meeting with LSU boosters and driving around town just to see different things. As we get more info, we'll share that. But just understand that if Lane Kiffin to Florida were a done deal, this doesn't happen, right? This Lane Kiffin visiting LSU or Layla Kiffin visiting Baton Rouge is indicative of the interest, which I have told you repeatedly is both sincere and mutual. LSU, I have said this for 3 weeks since Brian Kelly was fired. LSU identified Lane Kiffin as their number one target. Yes, they spoke to Nick Saban. They've had lots of conversations with agents about other candidates, but very quickly they identified Lane Kiffin as their number one target. Now, this is still not done, and I want to reiterate this, okay? So there is no misunderstanding about what I'm saying. I am not saying with 100% certainty, that Lane Kiffin is going to be LSU's coach. Lane Kiffin may very well choose to stay at Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin may very well choose the University of Florida, as we talked about in the previous episode, which I would highly recommend you go listen to or watch. Shout out to our everydayers. But Layla Kiffin went to the University of Florida. Her dad, John Reeves, was a quarterback at the University of Florida. They were in Gainesville on Sunday. So sure, and I believe that financially, whatever LSU is going to offer, Ole Miss is going to offer, Florida will match. I think this isn't going to be a money thing because they're all going to make the same offer to where they'll make Lane the highest paid coach in the country. It's about where does Lane Kiffin feel like he can win? And we're going to get to that a little bit more here in a second. One other thing I would like to address, because I was passed a note from someone suggesting that Knox Kiffin had already had an NIL offer for both U-High and Catholic High. Well, I can't speak for U-High, but I will share this with you. I spoke to someone on the administration at Catholic High, which if you know anything about me, I attend to Catholic High. I love my school. And I spoke to an administrator there who told me, and I'll read you this text, Knox Kiffin has never stepped foot on Catholic's campus. No one from his family has ever spoken to Catholic High. This person said, I don't speak for U-High, but the NIL sounds like BS. A school facilitating any type of NIL deal would be a massive violation of LHSAA rules. So I just want to point out, there is still so much misinformation and bad information. So the thing that I say every single day is consider the source. When it comes to coaching searches, believe nothing, consider everything, but always, always consider the source in these types of conversations. So we know Layla Kiffin was in Baton Rouge. We know there is sincere and mutual interest, and they are not taking this well in Oxford, which we'll get to next, as there's a report of an ultimatum for Lane Kiffin. What this means, we'll explain it next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So with all of this percolating right now, Ole Miss has kind of been melting a little bit. Again, if you caught our previous episode, and if you missed it, I would highly recommend you go back and listen or watch just for context on a lot of this. So again, this was the episode that we dropped on Sunday, the day after Ole Miss beat Florida, for all intents and purposes, punching their ticket to the college football playoff. And remember, Lane Kiffin in that postgame press conference was asked point blank, do you expect to be the Ole Miss coach next year? And he wouldn't answer the question.
There's a lot of talk about you for coaching searches right now. Do you anticipate being the head coach at Ole Miss next year?
Yeah, I think the last chapter thing makes me feel like I'm like 80 years old, you know? So I don't like being old, so I don't really like that part of the story that makes me feel like I'm on my last chapter. So I love what we're doing here. Today was awesome, and I don't talk about that stuff. And really to even talk about it right now would be so disrespectful to our players and how well they played today. So, you know, we got a lot of things going here, doing really well, and I love it here.
So Lane Kiffin was asked a very direct question, hemmed and hawed, wouldn't answer it. The Mississippi Secretary of State, several boosters lashed out against Lane Kiffin. And it's very obvious what's transpiring here. The Ole Miss, the collective Ole Miss fan base can feel him slipping away. They love him. They embrace him. They're giving him everything he wants, and he isn't loving them back. And so they're in a very awkward spot. I think both sides are. Lane Kiffin very much wants to coach his team through the playoff, but he wants to take another job. That much is evident, right? If he wanted to stay at Ole Miss, they've had the contract offer on the table. He could have signed it at any point and put this to bed. He refuses to put it to bed, which tells you he has a wandering eye. He wants to either be at Florida or LSU, which means he likely next year will be at Florida or LSU, unless the allure of coaching his team in the college football playoff this year is a strong enough pull to make him forget about those overtures and stay in Oxford, even if he feels like he has a lower ceiling. Well, however it shakes, the Ole Miss administration, boosters, fan base are getting very frustrated. And there was a report on Monday from Stuart Mandel over at The Athletic that they, Ole Miss, and athletic director, the athletic administration, Keith Carter, have given Kiffin what they described as an ultimatum, that he has until November 28th, which is Black Friday. It's the day of the Egg Bowl, to let them know if he's going to continue coaching at Ole Miss or if he's taking the Florida or LSU job. Now, I have had a lot of conversations subsequent to that prior and subsequent with folks at Ole Miss, and a lot of them have hesitated to call it an ultimatum and maybe don't even think that date is necessarily accurate. But the way I look at it is very clear. Ole Miss has got to know. They've got to get an answer from Lane Kiffin, because if he is not going to continue on as their head coach, they need to make plans for who their next coach is going to be, because Ole Miss is then going to be in the coaching market. So I'll give you a hypothetical. John Sumrall is a very hot name, the Tulane coach. And most of the scuttle is that John Sumrall covets Auburn and likely would be the next Auburn coach. There's a lot of people calling John Cohen, the AD at Auburn, pushing him to hire John Sumrall. I think that everyone has that right now, that Sumrall seems to be the apple of Auburn's eye. Well, if Ole Miss comes open, what if Ole Miss wanted to target John Sumrall? And what if John Sumrall would be interested in Ole Miss? Well, Ole Miss can't in earnest begin its coaching search unless if it knows it's going to have a coaching opening. And what you don't want to do is wait 2 more weeks when a lot of these jobs might be filled. The whole coaching cycle has moved up. Consider on this day, Monday, as we record, Virginia Tech has already hired James Franklin. That became reported today. And Franklin was trying to delay to see what else was out there. But what you're seeing is with everything moved up, the December portal window, the December high school signing period starting December the 3rd, the January portal window, this used to be, you'd play the final game of the regular season, coaches would get fired, and then throughout December, you'd begin the coaching carousel. It's happening now earlier. Coaches are getting fired earlier and hired earlier because they all moved the signing period and the portal window up. So everything is getting accelerated, including firing and hiring coaches. So Ole Miss needs to have an answer. And I'm not sitting here trying to litigate this conversation again about if Ole Miss should let Lane Kiffin coach in the playoff. I'm sure he wants to, but the bottom line is Ole Miss is making the right decision. Just think of it in real life. If that's your spouse, and then all of a sudden your spouse starts seeing other people, like you're not going to be married to your spouse anymore. Like you're gonna make that person commit. Like decide this is a commitment. And if Lane Kiffin isn't going to do it, then Ole Miss isn't going to let him coach their team through the playoff while he's working for someone else. It's just nonsensical. This isn't a G5. This isn't, Central Michigan making the New Year's Six, knowing that PJ Fleck is going to go take the Minnesota job or something along those lines. This isn't, a G5, G6 coach coaching through the playoff, knowing that they're already leaving for another job. Like this is Ole Miss potentially losing their head coach to a team in their league. And in the case of LSU, a team they're going to play every year. So no, you're not going to let him continue to coach. And that's 100% the right decision. And they need to have an answer because obviously they're going to have to start their own process in earnest. And I think they're just fearful of what the answer is going to be. Now, that timeline, be it the Egg Bowl or before, greatly benefits LSU. Because if Lane Kiffin does, in fact, pick LSU, one of the conversations we were having, and I asked Virg Osbury that question on my radio show when he was on 2 weeks ago, would you wait to the end of the playoff for the right coach? And he said, yes, they would. But if you were waiting through the end of the playoff, you're missing the December signing period and the January portal window if you wait to the end of the playoff. So it really compromises your ability to build a roster if you have to wait that long. Well, in this instance, if Lane Kiffin's going to make a decision, and if he picks LSU, great. Well, now here within the next 2 weeks, and so you can recruit to that. You can finish your recruiting class for that, and you can move on knowing who your coach is. And if he does not pick you, if he picks Florida or if he picks stays at Ole Miss, then you can move on to whoever is next on your list. And there's literally no other candidate that you'd be looking at that would be coaching through the playoff where this would be an issue. You would be likely hiring a sitting head coach, but someone who you could hire as soon as the regular season is done. And so then you're right into that December signing period and the January portal window. So the timeline of this ultimatum that Ole Miss is given, while they're doing because it benefits them, it actually also greatly benefits LSU because you're not going to have to now wait till mid or late January to know if Lane Kiffin is in fact going to be your coach. So the only thing left really to have a conversation about is, well, who is Lane Kiffin going to pick? Is he going to stay in Oxford? Is he going to pick Florida? Or is he going to be the next coach of the LSU Fighting Tigers? I have some thoughts on that and why LSU very likely is in the lead. We'll wrap up with that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. I alluded to some of this in our previous episode. And again, I would highly recommend that you go check out our previous episode if you missed it. It now, especially now with the benefit of hindsight, knowing what happened on Monday, it will put so much more of that episode into context. So even if you listen to it once, go listen to it again. But remember what Lane Kiffin is weighing here. Lane Kiffin is trying to make a decision on where he feels like he can win championships. And the fact that he is considering Florida and LSU while he's got an offer from Ole Miss on the table and a team where he just beat both Florida and LSU and has an offer on the table to stay there and is clearly contemplating leaving, it tells you what he thinks about what his ceiling is at Ole Miss and what the ceiling would be at the other two places. Can you get in a 12-team playoff at Ole Miss? Yes, clearly he's doing it. Can you win a championship at Ole Miss, let alone multiple championships? That becomes much more complicated. Now, I think it's also important to know who the people advising Lane Kiffin are and what they're likely telling him. This is the thing that is probably going to be lost on most, that won't be part of this conversation for most. Most people are going to look at what the dollar amount is and stop. And I'm here to tell you, Ole Miss, Florida, LSU, doesn't matter. They're all going to pay him. They're all going to pay him. They'll all match. They'll all pay him what they need to pay him to keep him or get him. If it's 14, 15, 16 million dollars, whatever it is, like that's not going to be the deciding factor because everyone will pay him. So the question becomes, what are the things he's considering and who's advising him? Well, one person that is advising him is Nick Saban. And we have talked here on this show about the Saban interest. And while I have said, believe nothing, consider everything, and I don't believe Nick would be LSU's coach. I put it at a microscopic percentage. You leave the door open, even if ever so slightly, because you never know if you might make an impulsive decision. But what is undeniable, and I've reported, and I'm sure a lot of other people have too, is that LSU representatives have spoken to Nick Saban. Verge Osbury, it told me on the record that he and Nick have a standing conversation every 2 to 3 weeks. I know that there are a group of boosters who have personal relationships with Nick Saban that have spoken to him through this process as well. And Nick Saban, no doubt, is advising Lane Kiffin as well. And you better believe that Nick Saban is telling Lane Kiffin, pick LSU. Because Nick Saban won a championship here. He knows what resources are here. The other part of that, too, is Jimmy Sexton. Jimmy Sexton is Lane Kiffin's agent, as he is Nick Saban's agent. So consider why Jimmy Sexton is likely just holding an auction, right, for Kiffin and his services, but they're going to make money either way. But also consider the trickle-down effect of this from an agent's perspective. So Jimmy Sexton is with CAA, gigantic agency. Okay. And he's got a ton of high profile coaches on his roster. But keep in mind, CAA doesn't only represent coaches. Of course, they represent players too. Well, if CAA has one of its clients as the head coach at a major university, isn't it plausible to assume that agency would have a strong in to represent the players at that university, either in NIL or later in their NFL contracts? So CAA was at LSU when Nick Saban was here, but Les Miles was represented by Rocky Arsenault. Ed Ogeron wasn't represented by CAA. Brian Kelly had Trace Armstrong. So you're talking about a long period of time where LSU, which is one of the most talent-rich NFL-producing programs, has not had a CAA-represented coach at the helm of the program. So you don't think maybe, just maybe, that someone like Jimmy Sexton, who, by the way, also has a great relationship with Verge Osbury, who's LSU's athletic director, you don't think that maybe, just maybe, Jimmy Sexton is trying to push Lane toward LSU because of the potential talent windfall that could benefit CAA and him as well? I mean, look at LSU. I mean, it's the top producing talent in the NFL. It's Bama and Georgia and Ohio State and LSU. I mean, it's what it is. Sure isn't Ole Miss, I'll tell you that much. So the people closest to Lane Kiffin that are advising him are professionally are most certainly pushing him toward LSU. And all that could be overridden by family considerations. Certainly, if his family wanted to be in Gainesville, then he could go there if the money's the same and all that stuff. And as far as CAA at the University of Florida, remember, like, they got tons of coaches in Florida. They got Miami and Florida State and University of Florida and UCF and all these schools all over Florida where you can get talent. But LSU is the only game in town in Louisiana. And the other part of this that could absolutely play, and this is, if I could put a bug in the phone of Nick Saban having a conversation with Lane Kiffin, my guess is we'll probably hear him say something along the lines of, if I had stayed at LSU, I would have won 10 championships, which is true. Nick Saban was in his late 40s when he arrived in Baton Rouge, and he left and went to Miami because he had to scratch the NFL itch. And then he stayed 15 years at Alabama, and he won 6 titles in 12 seasons. For Lane Kiffin at 50 years old, he could spend the next 15 years. Like, think of it. We may think of it in a 5, 6, 7-year term. Lane Kiffin could spend 15 years at LSU. He could. This could be his last stop, and he could do at LSU what Nick Saban did at Alabama. Could. He could break all the records. He could win all the championships. He could be at LSU what Saban was at Bama. He could create his deified status at LSU. And I'm guaranteeing you that's a conversation he's having with the people professionally who are advising him. And the last consideration was family, and LSU worked to check that box on Monday with Layla Kiffin flying into Baton Rouge to see the town. Does Lane Kiffin wait until the Egg Bowl to make a decision? It's hard to imagine that, because this thing is boiling over, and it certainly feels like they can't do this for 2 more weeks. We're nearing an answer, finality in the Lane Kiffin saga. Will it be LSU? Will it be Florida? Will he stay at Ole Miss? When we know, we'll talk about it right here on Locked on LSU. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. If you're on YouTube, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.